There's pretty much nothing like getting to the end of a great book and leaving it feeling totally satisfied, right? Even if it didn't end how you expected. You get to sigh that big contented sigh, like, you know what I'm talking about, that sigh. But there's also the opposite. You know, a book can be amazing all the way through, but if the ending isn't satisfying, I don't know about you, but I don't have a good memory of it. So how do you stick the landing? I'm going to share 3 strategies for how to write a satisfying ending to your story. Let's go. Okay, my first strategy is to let your character be surprised, and maybe yourself as well. I've told this story before when I did an episode on writing a great plot twist, but I'm going to tell it again here because it's relevant and I think it really illustrates this point. When I was working with my editor at HarperCollins on my first novel, called When You Read This, we went back and forth on a few drafts, as you know, we do. And as we were getting closer to it being ready to go to production, she sent me a note saying she just felt like one more thing needed to happen in the last quarter or so of the book. She didn't know what, but she just said, you know, a little something. And I totally got it. I knew what she meant. I agreed. I felt it too. We needed a twist of some sort. I sat down to think about what it could be, and it actually didn't take me that long. I figured out what it was. I needed to surprise the main character, Smith. I needed to surprise him. Now, get ready for a spoiler. In my novel, in the last stretch of the novel, Smith learns that his best friend, who died before the book opens, might have been in love with him. Doozy, right? To discover something like that means perhaps nothing was what he thought. When you can surprise your main character, it can feel really satisfying to the reader. I think in part because it's such a true to life experience. We all know what it feels like to have the rug pulled out from under us, to realize that things have not been what they seemed. In my novel, Privilege, I did a similar thing. My character, Stasia, has always looked down on her cousin, who she lives with, throughout the book. She thinks her cousin is reckless, irresponsible, a troublemaker who's always a nuisance and relying on Stasia to fix her problems for her. But at the end, when, spoiler alert again, her cousin dies, Stasia is surprised to discover that she had been the one relying on her cousin in a lot of ways. It's a kind of sixth sense moment. Do you remember that movie? A child psychologist, played by Bruce Willis, is treating a little boy who says he communicates with dead people. The little boy and the psychologist work together throughout the movie, and then at the end, the psychologist learns that he himself is already dead. Boom. Now, it doesn't have to be that dramatic or gimmicky. A character doesn't need to find out that the entire time, she's been dead or that everything was a dream. But something to surprise the main character can just be a killer way to tie everything together. I'm also not saying that as the author, you need to see it coming or plan it. I never do. I'm always as surprised by it as my character is. And truly, that's part of the fun. Strategy number 2 for writing a satisfying ending is to deliver on what you have promised. Have you ever gone to a movie and you thought by the end, man, I paid $12 for this, or $30 if it's after the pandemic? That kind of disappointment stems from having an expectation that's not fulfilled and not in a good way. Satisfying endings can be surprising and surpass expectations. A reader gets what they were promised and more. What they don't do is fail to meet those expectations. Okay, and here's what I mean. Let's say you're writing a book about a character who's getting married. She's planning a wedding, and a whole bunch of the plot has to do with all the things leading up to the wedding. And then the book ends, and we never made it to her wedding. What? You just spent most of the story showing us the planning of the wedding. So sorry, but you're pretty much obliged to show us the wedding, even if it's unsuccessful. Now, you could cancel the wedding, sure, but you gotta do something. And if you're gonna cancel it, maybe cancel it in an interesting way. We need something if we've been promised a wedding. The reader is expecting to see how all of the complications pay off. And if you don't show the payoff, they're probably gonna feel a little betrayed. It doesn't have to be that hard to figure out what promises you've made to a reader. Just put yourself in the shoes of the reader and think, what would I be very disappointed by if I didn't get to see it happen in this book? Okay, I have one more strategy for you. But before I share it, I just want to invite you to apply to my program, the Book Incubator. Link is down below this video. It's just 2 questions. It takes less than 5 minutes. And if you're writing a book, you'll definitely want to check it out. Now, back to the video. Strategy number 3. My final tip for you to write a satisfying ending is to embrace ambiguity. I teach the writers I work with in my program, the Book Incubator, to always nail down what their big question is before they begin. The big question is about what you want to say in your book, what big, thorny, universal human question you want to explore. Like, for example, how do we cope when people don't turn out to be who we think they are? Or how do we forge a new identity when we realize we aren't who we thought we were? Or what's the cost of ambition? The big question will always guide your book, and it will always steer your ending. But it's more about what feeling you want to leave the reader with than you providing the reader with some objective answer. Questions like these that are this big and sprawling don't really have an answer, at least not an easy one. That's how they're big enough to explore through an entire novel. That's why we'll read 300 or 400 pages trying to understand them. You're unlikely to land on a black and white answer, and that was never the point. So in this way, there will be some ambiguity at the end of your story, no matter what, and that's a good thing. But even on a more granular level, even if we're just talking about literal plot lines, the same is true. Often writers will ask me how many loose ends they can leave hanging at the end of their drafts. And I always say, a few. You don't need to trim them all up. That's too tidy. Ambiguity, not getting a clear answer to everything or being somewhat unsure of how some aspect of the story turns out, can add a lot of texture and realistic nuance to your story. Because in real life, things don't wrap up. They don't wrap up in a bow. And actually tying up every loose end in your story can almost make it feel contrived, which is not satisfying. I'm reminded of a quote from the comedian Gilda Radner. She says, "Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. Delicious ambiguity." I love that last phrase, delicious ambiguity. So let's embrace the delicious ambiguity of life, and don't be afraid of not providing answers to everything at the end of your story. If you made it this far in the video, I'm guessing you're writing a book or want to write a book. And if so, I want to hear from you, because when I'm not writing, my mission in life is to help writers write their dream books. I love it. I live for it. If you're curious to know more, I have a free video walking you through my exact process for writing a book. You can get it by clicking below and answering 2 questions to apply to my program, the Book Incubator. You get the video whether you join or not, no pressure to enroll. So just click below and tell me a little bit about you and your book or your book idea. I'm so excited to hear from you.